Hello and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, or whichever. Malan, how are you?
Okay, I'm still in Malaysia, so it is good evening, and
Good
it
evening
is
then.
Vesak Day for Malaysia.
Oh, is that
So it's a
right?
public, yes, it's Vesak Day, and for all our friends and audience who are either joining us or who will be joining us later, I hope you have a meaningful Vesak Day celebration.
Nice, nice. And welcome to the month of May, which the theme here for the month of May is giving voices, right? And for all those who have logged into our show, Leadership in Flow Asia, what is this show about? This show is where we interview leaders, right? And understand growth, whether it's their personal growth, their leadership growth, or organizational growth. And today, we have a very interesting leader. I know you're going to introduce her, right? Animah Kosai. Go ahead. Tell us who she
Okay.
is.
Well, uh, we, I must say that I first met Anima, as to I heard Anima in Clubhouse. And every
Mm.
time she speaks, right, it's about speak up, the speak up community, inviting everybody to speak up. And every time I went into that space, right, when I hear her speak, one is I'm very inspired by her courage to get people to speak about subjects that can be, I would say, really challenging, sensitive,
Okay.
difficult.
Okay.
But I think what really makes a difference is, she's talking about, she's first getting people to talk about something that's really important to them. Yet,
Hmm.
we may not feel safe or have the space to speak up. So once she provides that, and I think the more exciting thing, the more interesting thing about Anima that I think I've come to unconsciously come to admire about her is her calmness and her ability to bring peace to that space.
Okay.
Whenever we talk about leaders or individuals who, want to talk about something that is radical, sensitive, right? Sometimes you realize that, we create more conflicting space. But
Okay.
Anima is not like that. And perhaps that's why today she is the executive director of Speaking Up Network,
Okay.
right? And of course, we know psychological safety is very important. But we're going
Hmm.
to talk to her today to find out how all of this is going to come together. So for those who've joined us, thank you for joining us. Those who haven't joined us, I hope you join us or watch us later, because this is going to be a very exciting, interesting topic about how to, talk about things that are issues that are really close to our heart, yet
Mm-mm-mm.
with the intention of bringing peace. So with that, let's bring Anima on.
All right. Cool.
Hello. Hi.
Hello,
Anima, thank you
Animah.
so much for saying yes to our show after such a long chase, and months of listening to your voice on Clubhouse. Right, thank you. It's so good to meet you. And I must say this before I give you the mic. I know, we have a lot of questions. And I think Ashok, you were also inspired by the fact that, in our pre-meet, Anima said she gave us a lot of golden nuggets. But one of the best that I loved was the best leader are those who work on themselves. So with that, you can expect why Anima is the right person, for our team giving voices safe to speak up. So Anima, how are you?
I'm very well, feeling quite energized. It's earlier for me. It's just gone 11 here in Nottingham. I'm in the UK. First of all, I want to wish happy Wesak Day to all my Buddhist friends. And also, someone greeted me this morning when I said I'm doing this LinkedIn Live. He said, "May the 4th be with you." So, also happy Star Wars Day. Right? And I want to share a little anecdote. I mean, so years ago, before people kind of cottoned on to Star Wars Day, I was in a senior management meeting in this company I used to work for in the oil and gas industry in Kuala Lumpur, right? And we had an office also in the Petronas Twin Towers. And so I was in the senior management meeting. It was about to start, and it was May the 4th, right? It was about to start. So all these senior guys, I'm like one of the few women in the room. And I go, "Good morning, everyone," because we always have our meetings at 10 o'clock on Tuesday mornings. I go, "Good morning, everybody. Happy Star Wars Day." And they look at me and I go, "May the 4th be with you," right? And everybody cracks up. But that was the lightness of the meeting. Although it was serious business. I mean, we were talking about serious issues and there's senior people there. But we kept it in a fun way, so people felt really safe to discuss issues, and we'd argue a lot. There'd be raised voices, and we say, "No, you can't do that," but nobody took it personally because we all felt safe. You know what I mean? So I mean, and this is kind of like we try and carry that wherever we go, because you get the best out of people when they feel safe.
Nice.
Wow.
So, Animah, I'm going to start off with a question for you first, right? Based on our show, I know there's a little bit of background that you shared about yourself. Now, what drove you to advocate for marginalized voices in your organization? So you could give the audience a bit of a context and then share with us what was your driving purpose behind that.
Well, I'm a lawyer by background, right? And that's what lawyers do. Lawyers kind of speak for others, right? We're always like we advocate. You said it. We advocate for other people, whether we believe it or not. I mean, I've been on two sides of opposite, arguments and things like that, which makes it very difficult sometimes. But because we're speaking for others, and so this whole thing about speaking up. And what used to happen sometimes is people would come to me and say, Animah, in the meeting, can you say this? Can you say that? I'm like, well, why can't you? No. It'll come better from you because, you're the lawyer, you're the whatever, So I do that, but I'd feel very frustrated. Like, why do I have to speak for someone else when you should be able to make the case yourself? Because this isn't my issue, right? And I realized, like, well, it's because they don't feel safe to do that. And I don't know whether it's me with toughened up in front of Malaysian judges and so on, right? You kind of take any brickbats that come at you, and I put this armor on, like, okay, bring it on. And not everybody's like that. And also the other thing is, in my role when I was an in-house lawyer, I would investigate things and things that didn't go right. And often, when we do interviews and things, we'd find people who knew what was going on, but they wouldn't say anything. And I go like, why? Well, why didn't you come forward and say, report this earlier or come and speak to somebody? And again, it goes back to not feeling safe. And I realized over time that this wasn't unique to where I worked.
Sure.
I thought, oh, is this a Malaysian / Singaporean thing? No, it's worldwide, right? And at that time also we had in Malaysia 1MDB sort of bubbling up and all kinds of things happening, and a lot of people knew things but were too afraid to speak it because they were worried being fired, getting fired. All kinds of repercussions can happen, and they didn't know who to trust. But it wasn't just Malaysia. If you look at a broader, I was looking at what's happening around the world. So in Volkswagen, you had the famous Dieselgate case, and there were engineers there who knew what's going on. And again, it's come out now that there was a very strong fear organization, fear culture. Right from the top, all the way down. And people were afraid, I might lose my jobs and so on. And then, of course, the famous Harvey Weinstein and Me Too and all that. And people knew, but nobody dared because this was someone really powerful. So you see this over and over and over again. And so that's one thing when we're looking at harm. And the other thing, also, what happens in spaces where people feel afraid to speak up, because when you want to speak up on something harmful, that is the highest stake thing. That is the most dangerous thing to do. But there's also like people might want to speak up on ideas. They have some brilliant ideas that they want to share, but they're afraid of being laughed at, or they've tried in the past and they just get shot down.
Sure.
Oh, I don't know, that's not going to work, before they've even had a chance to do that. And that especially we see that happening with younger people or people more junior in the organization. And then, when we talk about, let's say, DEI people, the historically marginalized people, that includes women in the West, that includes, Black and people of color. And of course, in countries like, even Malaysia, there are also minorities, right? Malaysia and Singapore also have certain minorities that they feel that or they can't be themselves or they can't say certain things. And whether we're talking about race, gender, sexuality, disabilities, other gender identity, all this, people kind of step back and they don't feel safe to be themselves, which also means they can't really give their all, when they're at work. And we lose out. We really lose out when people hold themselves back. So Speak Up is kind of born. I moved, from Malaysia back to the UK. I'm also, part British, and so I moved here and I decided, what, I want to do this on a bigger scale. And there'd be like, my own organizations and clients, but I thought I need to scale this up. I'd like everyone to benefit from this. And so we're now, we started what we call the Speaking Up Network, which is in an alpha test phase at the moment, but it's really a platform where people can come together, share their stories, have great ideas and desire to make change, whether it's in their organization, in their community, or on a global scale,
Okay. Well, thanks for that overall. See, you've given us a lot of context here. Number one, you talked about it's important to feel safe, right? And you also mentioned that it could be an organizational culture thing, right? And you also mentioned about the younger and marginalized people. So there are a few things that you're talking about. So let's break it down first. When you said it is about the importance of feeling safe, what does it mean to really feel safe?
So I guess from the perspective of an employee at work, to feel safe, I mean, number one, they feel they belong. They're part of the team, right? So we call this inclusion safety. And this is something that came from Timothy R. Clark, who wrote the book, 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. So first of all, you have to feel that you belong. And this is why work like DEI type work is really important. Because if many of your employees don't feel they fit in because they don't look like the main power people, the people at the leaders at the top, and if they feel that they are not honored and respected for who they are, they're not going to feel safe being themselves, let alone suggesting ideas and things like that. So that's one. The feeling of I belong, I really enjoy what I'm doing here, or I'm just going to come to work, do my 9 to 5 and then go home. Oh, thank God I'm out of the office, So inclusion safety is really important. And the other thing is that you have leaders, and we can talk about it, maybe when we talk about leadership specifically, leaders who are open and who are listening and who are receptive. So, because I think we've all been in places, we are all familiar with the authoritarian style of leadership, which used to be seen as a good thing, and now we know that it has its drawbacks. So leaders tend to think, oh, I know it all, I'm strong, I have the answers. And when they do that, they shut down other kind of ideas and conversations because it's like my way or the highway. They're not open to listening to others. So that listening and being open to feedback, so meaning that they themselves model behavior that if somebody gives them a different point of view, or somebody tells them that they're wrong, or maybe that idea is not such a good idea after all, maybe a KPI, a goal is problematic. If people don't feel safe telling them that, and I'll give Volkswagen as an example, because Volkswagen had this motto that nothing is impossible, right from the top. And that was from Ferdinand Pusch, one of the founders. Nothing is impossible, which basically meant, imagine the
Anything's
pressure on people, on engineers, because they actually could not design the engine that would meet all the criteria that met the Californian air
Sure.
emission standards within a small space, because it had to be a small car, right?
That's right.
And it was impossible at that time. But how could they, in an organization which is nothing is impossible, and it's like this is what you have to do, and it was very homogeneous in terms of it being in Germany, in a town, Wolfsburg, where everybody worked for Volkswagen. So you also see the context. So that worry about being fired is a very real worry. And the car
Okay.
industry is small, right?
Yep.
It's just like if you lose your job here, it gets known. So there's all these kind of things. And so
Sure.
when we have a very fear-based organization, people aren't going to speak up and say this
Okay.
isn't going to work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing two things here, right? So you said feeling safe is about a sense of belonging. I like that. And you said what is also important is leaders who are open, right? We have been hearing about leaders who they need to be open, they need to receive feedback, they need to listen. We've been hearing that for the longest time, for a long time. Tell me, what is the reason leaders are not open? Why are they scared? Why are they not open to feedback? We've been hearing it intuitively, we know it makes common sense, but what holds them back?
It is fear. I mean, it is fear. And I think part of it is also the systems that we work and live in, right? The structures. The way corporations, workplaces work is that, these are the goals and this is your role and you have to be like this. And so that's a huge amount of pressure on everybody. So we all kind of like, we ignore certain parts of ourselves, maybe the more creative side or whatever it is, and we just zoom in and focus on, okay, I need to deliver. It's almost like we have to be robotic in a sense. And that's everybody, as well as leaders. And imagine I think all three of us have worked at least 20, 30 years, right? 20, 25 years or so. And we've been in environments where it's essentially, it's expected that everybody knows what they're doing. They have the answer. And let's say the board says, do this, we all, the shareholders and so on, give this sort of like, we expect this, or companies promise to shareholders if they're listed, this is our goals. And then there's this awareness within the leadership team, it's not going to happen. And then there's a lot of fear because, number one, will we lose our jobs? That's still, the board might remove us. We've made these promises, we can't deliver. And that is especially so when you see things like COVID and other things happening, right? You see this when we talk about climate change, and in certain organizations, it's absolutely petrifying because it means like, well, what we do does harm the environment. So what we're going to do, my whole identity is around this. I mean, I worked in oil and gas, right? And so a lot of leaders at some deep level don't believe in what they're doing. Right? I mean, let's get to the core of it. And it's absolutely terrifying if your whole identity, your whole life, the money you've been earning and how everybody looks at you is based on, well, I'm a senior executive with this company and we do da 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 da. And then there's this underlying fear that what you may have been involved in has been harmful or can be harmful or is going to be questioned. And it's all too, I think most of us will put up this sense of denial and defensiveness. So if somebody tries to tell us, we don't want to hear it.
Sure.
So that then causes that knock-on effect. So other people are not going to feel safe if they tell us, and we'll go, oh, nonsense, or no, I'm too busy, I don't want to hear it, And that's how most of us behave.
Yep.
What we need to do, and it's really hard, and this is why I said, during the pre-call, it's a lot of this is a self-awareness in a journey. The self-aware leader And one of the very first things we have to acknowledge in ourselves is, I have done harm.
I have done harm.
I have done harm. I have made the wrong decisions.
Ah.
I may have made decisions or influenced decisions which may have caused harm in some ways. Maybe it harmed the community, or as a result of that, a lot of people lost their jobs, whatever it is, right? And it's not something that we're proud of. It makes us feel really, can I say shit? I mean, we really feel shitty about it, right? And nobody wants to feel that way. So instead of coming to our own sort of, I've really caused harm, we would prefer to deny it, ignore it, and continue.
So what I'm hearing again, Animah, I'm going to hand you to Mala, because when we talk about identity and going within deeper, Mala has got a list of questions. But I think you've set a very important stage here, where you talked about feeling safe, psychological safety, and you said what holds leaders back is their fear, right? And you also talked about the structure, the systemic structures around where people are still playing in that field, where there is an expectation, whether from an MBA point of view, stakeholders point of view, shareholders point of view. So there's a certain level of expectation. Everyone is playing out to an identity. And it appears to me what you're saying is, if you want to make another person feel safe, you need to be safe first.
Yes.
And that's where the identity part is important. And that's where understanding your values are important, where now Mala will be asking you questions around this.
I just want to say one thing about, you need to feel safe, as a leader. I think this several years ago, Ernst & Young did this survey on actually, speaking up or reporting harm and things like that. And they found that the higher up the ladder you go, the less likely you are to speak up, because you've got more to lose, and you've been in that system. Because when you do speak up, you're also admitting that being part of that, you've made those same mistakes.
Okay.
I mean, that's how I've analyzed it.
Sure. No, that's fine. That's important, because we value your insights, because you're the practitioner on the ground. You're not just writing a paper and putting it out there. You've seen what works. You have experienced this yourself. And that is why you speak with the confidence. Because when you said, I have done harm, right? I suspect to some level you've seen that, and maybe perhaps you had to have the conversation with yourself. You have to speak it up.
Yeah, I mean, and I've written about this as well. And, when I used to do sort of harassment-free workplace training, and especially among groups of leaders who themselves may have been seen as bullies, or have bullying behaviors, I'd open up and I'd tell them my own story of, how I was bullied at work. In the legal profession, that's quite rampant. But then also because, working in law firms, there is that culture, and you kind of take on these behaviors. So I was bullying victim turned bully, and I would also harass and bully people. And and I've shared this story many times. And it was when I then moved into oil and gas, and this was specifically Schlumberger, that my boss, my new boss, on my first week, right, hauled me up because I had said something harmful to one of my team members. And I didn't think it was harmful. I'm like, huh? That's nothing. She should try working in a law firm. Jesus, But I think he helped me see, because it wasn't so much what I thought or what my intention was, but the impact that I had on somebody else. And again, I went through that whole denial, justification in myself. But then I realized that I don't want to hurt people. Most of us don't. And it meant that I had to change my behavior, and I think, having gone through that, and I've shared this with many people also in some of my training sessions, it's amazing. They open up and talk about things that they're not proud of, that they've gone wrong. And there is something that's like a huge relief, where people in senior positions open up and said, I was working in this team and I did this and I said that and and now looking back, I really feel awful. And we're like, okay, open up, let's talk about it. Because until we can acknowledge what we've done wrong, how on
Yes.
earth can we move forward, right? Yeah.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. Muller, I've got a string of questions, but I'm going to leave to you to have one question, maybe two, then I come back.
No, I won't ask too many questions because I can see how you are really trailing Animah's thoughts. But before I hope I remember my question. But before that, I just want to say hello to people who've joined us and who've said hello. Hi, Vernon. So good to have you. Vernon has been waiting, online even before it was 6. Vernon, thank you for joining us. And Ashok, when you come to KL, you must meet Vernon. Okay. And
Okay, done.
Shamini
I've got a
is,
list of other people to meet too.
yeah, we probably have to have a gathering. Hi, Sham. I hope you've boarded the plane. Nick has also has just joined us after cooking. And Nick says, when Animah was talking about leaders, Nick says, it's like in an aeroplane where oxygen mask drop, you get safe first, then help others, right? Now, which brings me to all the things that you said about leader and identity and values, right? So on one hand, when I was listening to you, I feel like, oh my goodness, if the way we run businesses today, and I hope you will disagree with me, we're setting KPIs where rewards are getting bigger and greater. Our identities are getting stronger through our professional identities,
Yep.
right? So on one hand, psychologically, we say, okay, you are not your job on one hand, but yet we are defining success, celebrating success based on these things that we say doesn't define us, but that's what we celebrate, that's what we're rewarding, right? And so I'm just wondering, right? So if you look at the kind of organizations or leaders that you've worked with, so I'm going to put a blanket, assumption here about leaders. Now, if leaders are a leading organization and they are stuck with their identity of meeting KPIs and being successful, right? And they've done harm along the way, and we all would have made mistakes, right? It's just how quickly we become aware of the mistake and how courageous we are and vulnerable we are to then say, I've learned from it and I'm not going to repeat it. The earlier we do it in our career, it might get more comfortable to being able to do it, right? But the longer we wait, it's going to be more difficult, right? Now, so when you think about the kind of leaders you've met, right? How do leaders who have made mistakes in the past come around to say, I want to change because before this, I wasn't aware. I didn't think this was wrong, like what your boss did to you. My intention was positive. I grew up that way. It didn't hurt me. I'm all right. But now I'm recognizing my awareness has surfaced. But then if I do this, will will it haunt me for all the mistakes I've made? Would I be seen as an ineffective leader by the stakeholders? There's just so much of conflict, right? So tell me, how do you see leaders who've successfully transitioned deal with it? I know, Ashok, that was a very long question.
It was a very long question, right? First of all, I want to say hi to everybody who's listening. Like everyone, and Vernon actually took a look at the questions and kind of helped me a little bit. And I said to Vernon, we're not going to answer all these questions, are we? We just go with the flow. Anyway, coming back to that, first of all, the very last part of what you said, Malar, is about leaders who successfully transition. There's no endpoint. There's no successful transition. Ta-da, I'm there. It is actually a continuing, evolving journey. And
Nice.
we're going to get it wrong. And this is what leaders, first of all, need to acknowledge. First of all, there's no such thing as a perfect leader because we're all
Nice.
human, right? We're not robots, although some people describe themselves as robots, and those are fallible too. But I'm saying this because one of my colleagues is like that. And so there's no end point. There isn't. So we need to drop that. We need to acknowledge that part of our journey is, so you do something and then, you get something wrong because you said something harmful. Maybe you misgendered a person, for example, right? And it's pointed out to you. And instead of going into, oh my God, I'm a bad person, I'm a you're like, okay, I'm really sorry. I'll correct that. This is it. And then you move on, right? And then you're gonna make 2 days later, you're gonna make another mistake. Somebody tells you something and you realize, okay, I got that wrong. You course correct. That's what leaders should be doing. And I was smiling when you were when you were speaking, Mala, because I encounter this practically daily. I mean, as in whether it's myself or others. And I want to share a story, and I'm not going to name this person. There's a group. I was just saying, to Ashok earlier. I'm a fire starter. I just start off groups. That's what I do, and that's why speaking at network is something that I'd love to bring quite a lot of these groups together, and they can all get to know each other. And so I started this male allies group. So I'm not male, but I'm telling men, hey, this is not how you should be treating women. So all these men are like, yeah, I want to learn more. So we're in this direct messaging group on LinkedIn, and there's like 40 men. They're from 5 continents, right? They're all around the world, right from Australia to West Coast, North America, and they'll say things, and sometimes they get it wrong, right? And then it's only natural that they're going to get it wrong because they've never had to think like a woman or understand what a woman goes through and all that kind of stuff. So when some of us point things out, when I say us, it's not just women, it's other men as well who understand it a little bit better. Some men go like, oh my God, I didn't know this. But some are like, oh, I'm really sorry, and one publicly apologized just a few days ago because of he'd not quite said the right thing on a post of a woman who'd been sexually harassed. And then he apologized in that post. And I thought that was beautiful because what he was doing was modeling what it was like to get it wrong. And this is a man in his 50s, 60s, who all his life may have looked at things from a certain perspective. And then he's, told by a bunch of, youngsters like, and he took that feedback and he reflected. He took one day to reflect on it, which for me is what I do too. I would not immediately want to respond because you need to kind of digest it, and you need to let it sit with you. And you also need to acknowledge, wow, all this while I've been saying these things and I didn't. So for example, victim blaming. I may not realize that by saying these things, I'm actually putting it on the woman, and putting her at fault. And that's tough if you've been doing 20, 30 years. That's a lot of soul searching right there. So I said to the group, I said, as if you're going to be an ally, this is not going to be a comfortable journey. You're going to have to face your own demons. You're going to have to confront certain things that are going to be really discomforting. And this works whether we're talking about being an ally for women. And the anti-racism journey is really difficult for many people, especially for white people, because it just throws all kinds of things and questions a lot around your identity and your history and how you've seen the world. And then the question of, wait, did I get a job because I'm a white man? That's really difficult to take in, right? So it's no wonder that there's all this kind of resistance and denials and like, I was just reading, what was it? Florida doesn't want a DEI, ESG. They don't want, and this is coming through this fear and inability to step inside the self and realize, I have benefited from this. And in doing that, not realizing that that's caused harm to others. So it's an inner journey. All leaders have to go through this. Otherwise, what I always say, if you're not going to listen to your people, stories of, women talking about sexism or people of color talking about race, if you're not willing to listen to that, you do not deserve the title of leader, because you cannot be leading all people if you're not listening to them and believing them.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing the context about the leader trying to understand females and all. And I think you are helping us understand a bit deeper about how leaders can work on themselves, because we said we did come to the landing and say you need to start feeling safe first. And thank you for saying that, yes, this is going to be a painful journey, and I suspect it's going to be fruitful, right? I'm going to put it up there. It will be fruitful, because I think anything that you work on yourself to become better will only be better for everyone else, but yourself also.
And it
And
will be for your families, because
exactly,
for
exactly.
your spouses, for your children.
The
And one of the things
community.
I often
Yeah.
say when people talk about LGBT, trans and all that,
Mhm.
and they're going, oh, women are just biological women, for example, right? Or I don't like the LGBT lifestyle. How do you not know that one of your kids
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
LGBT? And this is
Yeah.
something I'm amazed by, the number of people who don't think about this.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned something earlier that is two things that you mentioned, distinctively different, almost sounding alike, but I think you can give us a bit more context, because these are important tools for us to know each other. You said it is important to apologize, where you shared the story.
Mhm.
And at the same point of time, you said he acknowledged. So there
Yes.
appears to be a very clear, distinct difference between acknowledging and apologizing. Can you help us understand the power of both?
Oh, I feel very, very strongly about this, because we often say, see people apologize, and I do this, like,
Yeah,
oh, I'm
apologize.
sorry. I'm sorry if you were offended. I mean, that's
Hmm,
not an apology, right? Because
that's right.
it's a slap back at the face of the person who was harmed. Acknowledgement is part of the apology. An apology without acknowledgement is meaningless. So, for example, let's say someone made a sexist remark, so something very simple, and it's pointed out to him. Normally, it's him, and the response, because what typically happens in people is we feel defensive when we're told
Yep.
that we said something harmful, like something
Mhm.
sexist. And the first thought that often happens in someone's head is like, well, I'm a good guy. I'm not one of
That's
those
right.
guys. I'm not sexual harasser or whatever. I'm a good guy. Like, how dare you? So that comes up, that sense of wanting to defend oneself because, hey, I'm good. And we're so hung up with that. And we're centering ourselves instead
Mhm.
of the person who was harmed. And so an apology actually means you step out of it. You don't center yourself. You center that person you just harmed, or the community that you harmed, right? You center them. They are the ones you need
Mm.
to be sort of like. And so it's not, I'm sorry if you were offended, right? It's actually take ownership of what you did.
Yes.
And actually, I don't think apologies should be immediate unless the person is really, really evolved and self aware, because you've not done that acknowledgement in yourself. You can't immediately apologize because you're still grappling. There's a lot of emotions going on in the head. So an immediate apology may not be really reflective and genuine and deep. It means sort of going away from that situation and reflecting on it,
Mhm.
trying to understand what was that harm. And one of the things I've learned, and this was a book I read by Kenji Yoshino and David Glasgow, called Say the Right Thing. They describe what is called a of circle of care. I think that's what it's called. So let's say someone in the middle has been harmed, right? And you're the next one there. Instead of then asking, so let's say you said something sexist to a woman, and then she says, hey, that's wrong. Instead of asking her, unless she's in a position to do it, like, I don't understand, why is that sexist?
Mhm.
She then has to, on top of the fact that she's just been hurt, now has to explain to you why she's hurt. And
Yeah.
that's a lot. That is a huge ask. It's emotional labor, it's draining, it's
Mm.
exhausting. What you then do with the circle of care, you go to the next level out, but you ask someone who gets it, who will
Mm.
understand, not someone who's going to validate you and say, oh yeah, you're a good guy, she's just too sensitive. You go to someone who is, in a sense, an ally, and get them to explain to you, or you read up, or whatever it is, right? And you need, so it could be asking other people to explain to you why what you said was harmful,
Mhm.
right? not to validate you and defend you, but to help you reflect on the harm that you've caused, right? Then you've just sort of done that reflection.
Mhm.
And then you go, God, and you need to own it. So you go back to the person, or however, in
Sure.
the safest way, and you say, I got it wrong. This was my mistake. I'm really sorry I said that or I did that. You see, it's owning it. So first of
Okay.
all,
Okay.
you own that you understand that you did that harm.
Sure.
And then
Thank you.
yeah. And then the other thing about an apology that makes it the most powerful of all is you then talk about, if you can, right? It's not always the case, what you will do to be different, either
Nice.
your behavior moving forward, or in we call it reparations, right? Or
Yep.
redemption, what you would do. And it doesn't have to be necessarily directly to that person, but it means like, well, maybe I will learn more,
Okay.
I will go into this and learn more. I will change my behavior. So and people need to be able to see that. And so the last bit after the apology is, people are going to watch you, right?
Mhm.
You really mean it when you said sorry?
Yep. Yep.
Well,
Yep.
you're still going around making sexist remarks. No, that wasn't. So then there needs to be, people need to see that change, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And it's actually, it
Mhm.
is I've gone through this myself. It is a very difficult and humbling journey.
Yep. Okay. No, but thank you for sharing, because this is very, very important, because we're still talking about how to feel safe. And what you mentioned was, it is important for the leader to be self aware first, right? If you need somebody else to help you, please tap on that.
Yeah.
But you need to be self aware. You need to reflect on yourself about how the type of harm that you've done, and you need to own up to it. And you need
Mhm.
to have an understanding of what, when you're apologizing, it is also important to understand that, to acknowledge not only what you've done, but the feelings. But you even talked about the retribution thereafter, that what are the actions you're going to be taking to be a better person.
So I'm gonna just
Fantastic
say the
steps.
word is not retribution.
Okay, okay, sorry.
Because retribution is seen as something that's punishing,
Redemption, sorry, redemption.
So yeah, and now a lot of people now talk about concepts like
Mhm.
restorative justice,
Yep, yep.
as opposed to retributive justice. So it's like, how do you put people back into the positions
Mhm.
that they were before the harm occurred?
Sure.
As opposed to, let's punish people,
Okay.
because when retribution hangs over you,
Mm.
people go underground. You
So
don't.
it's more
It
redemption.
goes back to safety, right?
That's right. Okay, so that leads to my next question. So let's say now the leader acknowledges, takes ownerships, and takes actions. Now, on the other side, how can we gracefully support the leader who's taking ownership and making the difference? How can we gracefully support them in their change as they want to feel safe?
That's a really good question, and I think there's several people involved in this, right? And I would say we must always remember those that were harmed. Those are the first ones we must be addressing, right? Actually, not the leader, or not the person who caused harm. Um, and there's several reasons for that. One is that, okay, so the people who are harmed feel supported. It goes back to that sense when I talked about inclusion. Okay, I
Mhm.
belong, because when somebody says something harmful to me, whew, I get a wave of support. And it could be, like, it could even be counseling kind of support, or whatever, that kind of support also. I think there's that. And then the second group, and this is what people always forget about, is everybody else. The witnesses, the people at work who were not directly impacted, but have seen it or knows it exists, because there will come times when, because they will take the clue from, what is the organization doing with the leader and with the group that have been harmed? Have they taken action, or are they just ignoring it? Or worse, are they, protecting the offender and acting against the victim? People are watching that, because that will signal whether the place is safe or not. So they will know will I be protected if something happens? So it's also really important to reiterate, like, okay, an organization said this happened and this is what we're doing, right? And communicating that. And they can do it through training or whatever. But that's constantly seen, by other employees. And then you come to the leader or the person who harmed. And for me, it's a red or green situation, which is, does the leader, first of all, want to change? That's the most important thing. And they may need coaching or whatever to acknowledge that they've caused harm and so on. But if they're not getting it, if they're being defensive and all that, it goes back to what I said earlier. They do not deserve to lead people. And really, then what the organization needs to be thinking, don't throw all your efforts into somebody who's not going to change. Seriously, why? Think of an exit strategy, don't keep them there, because that person, sure, they may be like a prima donna, they may be bringing a lot of money or whatever, they may be senior, but their ability, it's like a cancer. They can harm so many people if they're not changing. So it really means remove someone who is not willing to learn. So that's why organizations need to constantly reiterate their values and model it. And their leaders need to model it. So if one or two leaders aren't and they're problematic, you have to remove them. I mean, it's so working with the leaders is, if they acknowledge, yeah, I did the wrong thing, and they're willing to change, that's brilliant. And actually, they're then going through that journey, which I think is something that should be applauded and celebrated as well. But if they're not going to change, then
Yeah. And what I'm hearing and seeing on the ground is that because of the pressures in the business, the financial pressures in the business, a lot of people, I can't say a lot, they do not pay much attention to the values, and they don't create a very safe place for people, because suddenly the P&Ls are more important,
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing from you is, regardless, it has to start from the top, So
I mean, we've seen. I mean, the most famous perhaps was Uber, right? When what was his name? The CEO, was it Travis Kalanick? Am I getting the name right? He was removed by the board, right? Because his own style was creating sexual harassment as well as sexism and bullying culture. And in the end, they removed him, although he founded the company, right? I mean, he was Mr. Uber.
Sure.
So, and this was what, 6-7 years ago. So I think we're seeing more and more of these stories now,
Okay.
that whoever you may be, it's time to remove. We don't see it as much in Asia. We're seeing a lot more in the West, but I think everyone should take heed to this. I mean, I've heard of people who were very senior in even Malaysian organizations who've been quietly asked to leave because they've been problematic in some ways.
Okay. So what advice would you have for our viewers today who are leaders also, right? Let's assume I'm going to put a scenario where they are in a situation where maybe the top leaders do not create safety, but they want to create safety for their immediate teams. So what should leaders do to facilitate psychological safety, both for their team and both upwards? What are some suggestions you can make?
Number one, listen. Don't speak, listen. So even, I mean, and leaders always have meetings, for example, with their teams. You sort of step back. So when someone is speaking and sharing, don't interrupt, don't correct them. Don't, even if they're getting it wrong, don't immediately go in and correct them. Give them that space, and they may come around and actually, say that, get on board with things. So it's actually, leaders need to sort of step back and listen and not dominate and not always feel the need to be right. Because when you bring people into your team, you're bringing in people who you want to be, contributing and have incredible skills. That's why you hired them. And then what happens? We hire these people and then we tell them all to behave a certain way and just follow a certain plan, and we don't want to listen to what they have to say, right? What is that, right? So the thing is, step back, understand this urge in you, like, I want to say this, I want to say this. No. You're the leader. People are going to listen when you speak. So just sort of step back and encourage others and validate them. So when somebody, especially if they're young, right, and they're not as sure of themselves, when they say something, validate them, show that you've been listening, and say something like, well, I think that's a great idea. Or maybe like, we need to just, let's put that down and we can have a think about it. Even if maybe initially, but what you will see in time, and it's not immediate, right? It's a long thing. When people feel that you're listening, they feel, oh, right, I can say things. So first of all, it will be about ideas. But if it's concerns, which may be more challenging, they'll feel safer over several months. It's not immediate, right? Or maybe over a year or something. And then they'll come and tell you something that you need to know, because they know you're not going to bark at them, right? Or you're not going to witch hunt and blame them or somebody else. So the number one thing which leaders, I'm going to say, are really not very good at is listen. And it's active listening. It's not listening to judge them, or it's not listening to put across another point of view. It's not listening to debate or argue. It is listening because you genuinely want to hear what they have to say. And don't allow others to interrupt either. So, you get a lot of man interrupting. That's quite common, right? And often, it's a fact, right? There's so many statistics that show this, that, men dominate the meeting more than women. They say more. So always make sure in your teams that the lesser heard voices have that space too. So if you see someone interrupting somebody else, you go, wait, John, hang on a second. I'd like to hear what, Melissa has to say. She was speaking, So you're setting that very respectful culture that, when people have the mic, don't let somebody else grab it away from you. Hold on. You'll get your turn. Wait a minute. So it's really listening and making sure that everyone is included and has a space.
Sure. Okay, so thank you for that, because what I'm hearing is, when you said listening, you made it very clear. It is not just listening for the sake of listening. It's listening to really understand, to care. It's not listening to defend or protect yourself. It's throw your ego aside, which is very difficult.
Yes.
And you also said two things, right? One is to listen, and the other one is to give the opportunity to everyone. That means give everyone that voice, give that opportunity to everyone to speak up.
Yeah.
Right. So these are two things that you talk about, and I understand that. I get that. Now, earlier on, we also talked about the importance of having important discerning type of conversations, which can be quite radical sometimes, which is also important from an organizational point of view, right? It is important to have that level of conversation. So how important are radical conversations for organizations?
Very. And it's not happening enough because it's radical, it's scary. We don't like something that challenges us, right? And it's something that me and a couple of my North American colleagues, we've had a lot of conversations around this, and helping organizations facilitate some of these conversations, because it's not something that comes natural to leaders, like, hello, let's now have a radical conversation. It's okay, give me an example of what you think can be a radical conversation, and let's go with it.
It could be anything, right? From would you consider business operations radical, or are you talking about more about philosophy in terms of the way they treat, let's say, LGBTQs, women, so on and so forth? Is that radical? What would you think it is?
Any of them can be radical. So, like, business
Exactly.
operations can be radical if there's something unsafe. Maybe so it's raising an issue like, hey, do you know? Okay, radical conversation. Factory, fashion, factory, dye being dumped. There's like, hey, we're doing this. Shouldn't we change this?
Yeah.
And it's radical because it's challenging the how we do business,
Right.
and because it's going to bring up issues where people are going to feel unsafe, like, hey, you're telling me that we're doing this wrong, what we're going to
Sure.
do, we don't have the money to do. So it's going to get heated.
Yeah.
Right. And things like, let's say, LGBT, in Malaysia, it's still criminalized, right? I mean,
Right.
Singapore, you change your law, but in Malaysia, it's still criminalized. How do you have conversations like that in a
Right.
Malaysian company? It's a radical conversation.
Yeah. And you know
And
what?
so,
An hour ago, sorry,
yeah.
you talked about something that since you asked me a question, it just came to my mind. An hour ago, when you first started the show, you talked about how we treat the younger people in the organization. And I think that can be a radical conversation.
Oh, okay.
Because the way people, because you see, we have about 3 generations of people within an organization, at least within the Singapore, I suspect,
Or
even
4.
Malaysian context, or 4, right?
Mhm.
Where they come with different identities, beliefs, and they have different limiting beliefs about the younger generation who are in the workforce. And I think that can be a radical conversation, because
Yeah.
that is limiting them in the way they coach them, the way they give them performance feedback, so on and so forth.
So I mean, what me and my colleagues do, we've talked about facilitating radical conversations. This is what we do. We go in, with groups, and because actually a lot of leaders don't have that. It's about the art of facilitation. And one of the things about facilitation is that you kind of step back. You're a little more neutral, right? And you don't necessarily take a stand. But what you do is you eke out what people feel. And so, first of all, is creating that safe space that people are not going to feel judged for what they say, right? Even though you may have diametrically opposing things. And the other thing that's really important is there needs to be that space where if anyone feels triggered or harmed, they can leave. So there needs to be that understanding, because it can very easily happen. There's going to be, emotions can rise. So again, the ground rules, the setting of that space is really, really important. And the really good facilitators know how to do this. So one of the things that we talk about is that training leaders to facilitate some of these conversations and know how to do it. And it's not easy. It's really hard.
Right.
And I think Vernon's still listening. We cut our teeth on this, Malari, you may have heard some of this. We've had some of the most radical conversations in Clubhouse. And me as facilitator, there have been times like you can't, the wonderful thing about Clubhouse is you can't see us, right? Behind the scenes, I'm like almost literally screaming, like, what? Or like, oh shit, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say, And that's why the other thing, radical conversations to me should never be just one person facilitating. You need somebody else there. We've had like little chats behind the scene, like, Siobhan is brilliant. Siobhan, help, I don't know what to do. Come in and say something. And Vernon as well is incredible in that way. And I think we know what our trigger points are. Like, okay, I'm not going to address this. You can go in and say something. So it goes back again to self-awareness. But one of the things when we've done, our whether it's Clubhouse sessions or sessions with clients, is that among ourselves as the facilitators, we model what safety looks like in a radical conversation. And we even call out or call in things which people may have said that it's problematic. And I ask permission. I say, hey, Bob, you mentioned this. Are you okay if I unpack this? And they often go, yeah, okay, because they're curious. And then I sought permission, and I'll go, okay. So first of all, you mentioned this.
It is, yeah.
And then as a result, this happened, or people reacted in this way. So do you see how, saying these things, and sort of modeling some of that and unpacking. So I love the word unpacking, because you're
Sure.
taking someone step by step over what had just been said,
Okay.
and then they hear it, they see it, and people are learning, right? So
Sure.
there's we've had some people who said some most dreadful things, but you know what? They actually allow themselves to be used as an example.
Right.
These are some really, like, some actually can't handle it and they leave. Like,
Yeah,
okay,
it happens. It happens.
it
No,
happens.
thank you very much. Wow,
Do that.
Muller,
It's
my apologies, or you were living up to the theme for this month, giving voices. So you let me just speak for the last hour. You just only have one question for Animah. We came to an hour, Animah.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Yes, exactly. It has been exciting. You have shared a lot of things, and the way I break it down is, number one, you said there are some things that leaders can take away from this this sharing that you shared with us. Number one is about safety for yourself, right? Be self-aware, start taking ownership, and start building the safety for yourself. Once that is done, it's easy for you to build safety for others, and then learn the skills on how to facilitate radical conversations. And one of the ways to do that is to model safety during radical conversations. Now, thank you very much, Animah. Right? It's been a fantastic hour. Mala, do you have anything to share?
No. I think that there's a lot to unpack already with
That's right.
Animah. But
Yeah.
my greatest takeaway, I would say, is that I think psychological safety in giving voices has, whether you're a leader or you are affected by it, right? There's so much of growing up internally that needs to be done, right?
That's right.
So it is really internalizing who you are, what you say, and whether you mean what you say, right? Because I think what these radical conversations do is that they surface what you might have been holding and you didn't know it was harming people.
Hmm.
I think that's a difficult one, right? Because if you know, then you just avoid it, right? So can you imagine, you've always thought you are okay, you're fine, you are good, and then suddenly someone calls you out,
Yeah.
and now you're facing your own demons, like what Animah says.
Hmm.
And the potential of transition and growing in that space is great, which is why I think, what Animah says, the ability to first show up as an imperfect leader who continues to evolve and change and learn and model it, become extremely important to lead for psychological safety. I think already leadership is difficult. Now we have to lead for psychological safety.
That's
And
right.
I think the last bit is, this is like an evergreen thing that we hear from every other guest speaker when we have an opportunity, that leaders need to listen. And listen simply means that, we want to understand the other person's perspective, experience, life, right? Which means that it's not your agenda. Don't have an agenda. Again, right? This is about putting the other person as the center of attention. And my job is to serve your need as a leader. So there was just a lot to unpack,
Yeah.
Animah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna have fun trying to decide which are the bits that's important. I think this time we'll have to decide what is not important, and I'm sure there'll be very little. So Animah, thank you very much for joining us and giving
Thank
us
you.
so much
So much.
to think about, really.
Hmm.
So much to unpack for ourselves.
And a
Thank
special
you.
shout out to Nick Gomez
Yeah.
for putting all his thoughts on LinkedIn and sharing that during the show. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Nick.
Yes, and now we need to also acknowledge and apologize to Nick for not being able to read all of that, because we were like, really, we wanted to use the space to listen to what Animah was saying. But brilliant validation, brilliant confirmation. Thank you, Nick. With that, Animah, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
we really, really look forward to learning more from you. Thank you.
Okay. And may the 4th be with you. Bye.
May the
Yes,
fourth be with
thank
you.
you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Okay, all right. So yeah, we have exceeded our time. Thank you everyone for tuning in and staying with us. And I'm sure you have taken up a lot of great stuff, right? Thank you, Mallory.
Yeah, thank you. Good job, Ashok. Loads of questions. With that, this is Mother signing off from Malaysia. Till we see
And
you
Ashok from
again
Sebo.
next week with another exciting guest to unpack. So stay safe and again have a meaningful Vesak Day celebration. Bye.
Bye-bye.